This is HOA violation vault. A snow route sign turned into her favorite threat. You want to stop the tow? Then show me compliance. That was Patricia Foster, and she was standing in my driveway at 6 in the morning with a tow truck idling behind her. I work nights at a warehouse in Reston, Virginia, running a forklift crew, and I had just gotten home 20 minutes earlier. My elderly father was staying with me while he recovered from a hip replacement, and the last thing I needed was Patricia screaming about winter rules in front of the house. She pointed at a small pile of snow I had shoveled off my driveway the night before. The pile sat near the drain at the edge of my property, maybe 2 feet high, already melting in the morning drizzle. She said it was a flooding hazard. She said I had violated Section 12 of the Pine and Powder Association Winter Emergency Guidelines. She said the HOA had authorized the tow because my car was parked in a manner that obstructed snow removal operations. I looked at my car. It was in my driveway, on my property, nowhere near the street. I said, Patricia, my car is not blocking anything. She snapped her rubber gloves tighter and said, you can be mad, or you can be compliant. The tow driver, a guy in a reflective vest with a clipboard, looked uncomfortable. He glanced at Patricia, then at me, then at the laminated sheet she was waving around like a warrant. I asked to see the policy. She handed it over. I scanned it. The section she was quoting talked about snow piles obstructing drainage infrastructure during declared snow emergencies. The county had not declared an emergency. The pile was not blocking the drain. It was next to the drain, on my side of the property line. I said, this does not apply. There is no emergency declared, and the snow is not blocking anything. Patricia said, the board will back me because they are afraid of me. She said it with a smile, like she was letting me in on a secret. She said the HOA contracted with a preferred snow removal vendor who had already confirmed that my pile was a hazard. She said if I did not move my car immediately, the tow would proceed, and I would owe the HOA a removal fee plus a compliance fine. The fine schedule was changing at the first of the month, she said, and if I did not pay before tomorrow, the penalty would double. The tow driver cleared his throat and said, ma'am, I need to see the authorization paperwork before I hook it. Patricia froze. She said, I have it. She pulled out her phone, swiped a few times, then said, I will forward it to you right now. The driver waited. Patricia kept swiping. I could see her face turning red under her hood. After a long minute, she said, the management company has it on file. You can call them. The driver said, I need it in hand before I tow. Company policy. Patricia turned to me and said, this is not over. You are on notice. The hearing is scheduled for the 15th, and I am adding this to your file. She walked back to her car, a silver SUV parked at the curb with the Pine and Powder Association logo magnet on the door. The tow driver gave me an apologetic shrug, unhooked the equipment, and drove off. I stood there in the snow, holding the laminated sheet, watching Patricia drive away. I went inside. My father was in the kitchen making coffee. He asked what the noise was about. I told him the HOA tried to tow my car over a snow pile. He shook his head and said, you need to document everything. He was right. I pulled out my phone and took photos of the pile, the drain, my car in the driveway, and the property line. I checked the county website. No snow emergency. I saved screenshots. Then I called the Pine and Powder Management Company. The local rep, a woman named Diane, answered. I explained what happened. She said Patricia had filed a complaint 3 days earlier. She said the complaint included photos showing the snow pile and a statement from the preferred contractor claiming it was a flooding risk. I asked to see the photos and the contractor statement. Diane said she would email them. I waited. The email came an hour later. I opened the attachments. The photos were time-stamped 2 days before the snowstorm that created the pile. They showed a different pile, in a different spot near a different drain. The contractor's statement was a one-line memo on generic letterhead with no signature. It said, "Observed drainage obstruction at subject property. Recommend immediate removal." I called Diane back. I said, "These photos are not my property. The timestamps do not match. The contractor's statement is not signed." Diane said, "I am just forwarding what Patricia submitted. If you want to dispute it, you need to attend the hearing." I said, "When is the hearing?" She said, "The 15th. That was 8 days away." She said the board would review the complaint, the evidence, and my response. She said if the board found a violation, the fine would be $250, plus the cost of any remediation the HOA had to perform. I asked what remediation meant. She said, "If we have to bring in a contractor to move the snow, you pay for it." I hung up. I looked at the photos again. The lighting was identical in all 3 shots. Same angle, same shadow direction, same time of day. Patricia had staged them. She had gone to someone else's property, taken photos of a random snow pile, and submitted them as evidence against me. I screenshot the metadata from the image files. The XIF data showed the camera model and GPS coordinates. I plugged the coordinates into a map. The photos were taken 4 blocks away, at a house on a corner lot with a completely different drainage setup. I had her, but I did not want to blow it yet. I watched her pile on threats, because that is exactly what I needed her to do. If I showed my hand too early, she would just claim it was an honest mistake and move on. I needed her to commit. I needed her to escalate. I needed her on record saying this was about compliance, about rules, about authority, so that when I proved she faked the evidence, the board would have no choice but to act. The next morning, Patricia showed up again. This time she brought a crew. 3 people in reflective vests, carrying clipboards and a folding table. They set up on the sidewalk in front of my house. One of them had a tape measure. Another had a digital camera. The third had a tabbed binder with the Pine and Powder logo on the cover. Patricia stood behind them, arms crossed, watching me through my front window. I opened the door. I said, "What is this?" Patricia said, "Surprise inspection." She said the board had authorized a compliance audit of all winter violations in the neighborhood. She said my property was first on the list. I said, "You need to give notice before entering my property." She said, "We are on the public sidewalk. We are measuring from the property line. You can watch if you want." The guy with the tape measure stretched it from the edge of the sidewalk to the snow pile. He called out numbers. The guy with the binder wrote them down. The woman with the camera took photos from 6 different angles. Patricia walked over to the drain and crouched down, peering into the grate like she was inspecting evidence at a crime scene. She pulled out her phone and took more photos. Then she stood up, walked over to me, and said, "You are in violation. The pile is within 3 feet of a drainage structure. The policy requires a 5-foot clearance during active snow events." I said, "There is no active snow event." She said, "The policy does not define active. The board interprets it as any period when snow is present on the ground." I said, "That is not what the policy says." She said, "You can be mad, or you can be compliant." She turned and walked back to the crew. They packed up the table and the equipment and left. I took photos of everything. I took video. I wrote down the time, the weather, and what Patricia said. I saved it all. That afternoon, I got another email from Diane. The subject line said, "Updated compliance notice." The email said the HOA had completed a site inspection and confirmed multiple violations. The list included snow pile within restricted clearance zone, failure to maintain adequate drainage access, and unauthorized alteration of common area landscaping. The last one made no sense. I had not touched any landscaping. I called Diane. I said, "What landscaping violation?" She said, Patricia submitted a report claiming you removed a shrub near the property line to make room for the snow pile. I said, I did not remove anything. There is no shrub there. There has never been a shrub there. Diane said, do you have photos from before the snow? I said yes. I will send them. I went through my phone. I found photos from the fall when I was cleaning the gutters. The area near the drain was clear. No shrub, just grass and a small gravel border. I sent the photos to Diane. She replied an hour later and said, I forwarded them to the board. You still need to attend the hearing. The next day, Patricia tried to tow my car again. I was inside eating lunch when I heard the truck. I ran outside. The same tow driver was there, hooking up the front of my sedan. Patricia was standing next to him, holding a printed winter parking map. She said, you are in a designated snow emergency zone. Parking is prohibited during active removal operations. I said, there is no removal operation happening. There is no snow emergency. She said, the map was updated last week. Your driveway is now classified as a Zone 3 restricted area. I looked at the map. It was dated 5 days earlier. The zone boundaries were marked in red. My driveway was inside the red line. I pulled out my phone and opened the Pine and Powder website. I navigated to the winter parking map. The online version was dated 2 months earlier. My driveway was not in any restricted zone. I showed the driver. I said, the official map online does not match this. This is not enforceable. The driver looked at Patricia. She said, the board approved the update. It has not been posted yet. I said, then it is not enforceable. You cannot tow my car based on a rule that is not public. Patricia said, the HOA has the authority to enforce rules as soon as they are approved, regardless of posting timelines. She looked at the driver and said, hook it up. The driver hesitated. I said, if you tow this car without proper authorization, I will file a complaint with the county and your company. The driver unhooked the car. Patricia said, you are putting yourself on notice. The board will hear about this. She left. I called a lawyer. I explained the situation. The lawyer, a guy named Ed who specialized in HOA disputes, listened and then said, they are harassing you. Document everything. Attend the hearing. If they fine you, we can appeal. If they keep harassing you, we can file for injunctive relief. He said his retainer was $1,500. I did not have that kind of money sitting around, but I also could not afford to lose my car or pay escalating fines. I told him I would think about it. That night I could not sleep. My father asked if I was okay. I told him I was worried about the hearing, about the fines, about Patricia showing up every day with a new threat. He said, you need to find someone who will back you up. Someone who saw what happened. I thought about it. The only person who had been present for most of Patricia's visits was the tow driver, and there was the plow contractor who had been working the neighborhood during the storm. I had seen his truck parked at the end of the street a few times, engine idling, while he watched Patricia measure and photograph. I drove to the plow contractor's yard the next morning. It was a muddy lot off Route 7, surrounded by chain-link fence, full of salt spreaders and plow trucks. I found the office, a small trailer with a space heater and a woman at a desk covered in invoices. I asked if the driver who worked my neighborhood was around. She said, you mean Rick? He is out on a run, should be back in an hour. I waited. When Rick showed up, I explained who I was and what Patricia had been doing. He said, yeah, I have seen her. She is always out there with that binder. She tried to tell me I damaged a curb once. I told her the curb was already cracked. I said, did you see her take photos near my house? He said, yeah, a couple times. She was setting up shots like she was doing a photo shoot. I thought it was weird. I asked if he would be willing to give a statement. He said, I do not want trouble with the HOA. They control a lot of the contracts in that neighborhood. I said, If she is faking evidence, she is probably doing it to other people too. If you saw it, that is important." He thought about it. Then he said, "All right, I will write down what I saw, but I am not going to any hearing. I do not have time for that." I said, "That is fine. Just write it down and sign it. I will handle the rest." He gave me a handwritten statement on a piece of notebook paper. It said he saw Patricia photographing snow piles on multiple properties on dates that did not match the snowstorm timeline. He said he saw her measuring distances with a tape measure and taking notes. He said he never saw any flooding or drainage issues in the neighborhood. He signed it and dated it. I thanked him and left. I now had 3 pieces of evidence: the metadata from Patricia's staged photos showing they were taken at a different location, the comparison between the online parking map and the printed version she used to try to tow my car, and Rick's statement confirming Patricia was running around the neighborhood staging photos. I still had not revealed any of it. I wanted Patricia to commit at the hearing. I wanted her to stand up in front of the board and swear that her evidence was accurate, that her complaint was legitimate, that she was just enforcing the rules. Then I would drop it. 2 days before the hearing, I got another email from Diane. The subject line said, "Additional compliance action required." The email said the HOA had hired a contractor to remove the snow pile from my property and that I would be billed for the cost. The contractor was scheduled to arrive the next morning. The cost was $450. I called Diane. I said, "You cannot hire a contractor to enter my property without permission." She said, "The board voted to authorize emergency remediation under Section 18 of the bylaws." I said, "There is no emergency." She said, "The contractor is coming tomorrow at 8. If you interfere, the HOA will pursue legal action." The contractor showed up the next morning with a small tractor and 2 workers. Patricia was there too, standing on the sidewalk with her binder. I went outside and said, "You do not have permission to enter my property." The lead contractor said, "We have authorization from the HOA. He showed me a work order. It was signed by Patricia, dated the day before, and marked urgent. I took a photo of it. I said, I am not giving permission. If you enter my property, I will call the police." Patricia said, "The HOA has the authority to perform emergency maintenance on any property that poses a hazard to the community." I said, "There is no hazard. You are making this up." She said, "The board disagrees. The work is proceeding." I called the police, the non-emergency line. I explained that the HOA was trying to send contractors onto my property without permission. The dispatcher said an officer would come by. I waited. The contractors waited. Patricia waited. 20 minutes later, a county police officer showed up. He asked what was going on. I explained. Patricia pulled out her binder and started walking the officer through the winter emergency guidelines, the drainage policy, the site inspection report, and the board authorization for emergency remediation. The officer listened. Then he said, "Ma'am, the HOA is not law enforcement. If the property owner does not give permission, you cannot send workers onto private property without a court order." Patricia said, "The bylaws give us the authority." The officer said, "The bylaws do not override property rights. If you want to remove the snow, you need to go to court and get a judge to sign off. Until then, this is trespassing." Patricia's face went red. She said, "This is ridiculous. The board will hear about this." The officer said, "You are free to pursue it through the proper channels, but right now these workers need to leave." He looked at the contractors. They packed up and left. Patricia got in her car and drove away without saying another word. The officer gave me his card and said, "If they come back without a court order, call us." I thanked him. I went back inside. My father was watching through the window. He said, "She is going to make your life hell at that hearing." I said I know, but I am ready. The hearing was scheduled for 7 in the evening at the Pine and Powder Clubhouse, a bland one-story building with a meeting room that smelled like stale coffee and carpet cleaner. I arrived early. The board was already there, 5 people sitting at a folding table at the front of the room. Patricia was sitting off to the side with her binder open on her lap. Diane, the management company rep, was at a laptop projecting a slide that said Pine and Powder Association Compliance Hearing. There were a few other residents in the room, people who had hearings scheduled after mine. I sat down in the front row. The board president, a man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses, called the meeting to order. He said, "We are here to review a winter compliance complaint filed by board member Patricia Foster regarding property located at." He read my address. He said, "Miss Foster, please present your case." Patricia stood up. She walked to the front of the room and opened her binder. She said, "On the night of January 7th, the property owner created a drainage hazard by piling snow within the restricted clearance zone of a community drainage structure." She pulled out printed photos and handed them to the board. She said, "These photos document the violation. The snow pile is less than 3 feet from the drain. The policy requires 5 feet. She went on. She said I had refused to remediate the hazard. She said I had interfered with HOA contractors. She said I had called the police to prevent legitimate emergency maintenance. She said the board needed to send a message that violations would not be tolerated. The board president looked at the photos. He said, "Mr." He looked at his notes. He said my name. He said, "Do you have a response?" I stood up. I said, "Yes." I walked to the front of the room. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the projector. I opened my photo folder. I said, "First, the photos Miss Foster submitted are not from my property." I displayed the metadata screen showing the GPS coordinates. I said, "These coordinates place the photos 4 blocks away, at a different address." I showed a map with the location marked. I said, "Second, the timestamps show the photos were taken 2 days before the snowstorm that created the pile Miss Foster claims I am responsible for." I displayed screenshots of the weather history showing no snow on the date the photos were taken. The room went silent. Patricia stood up and said, "That is not true. Those are from your property. I took them myself." I said, "The EXIF data does not lie." I pulled out Rick's handwritten statement and handed it to the board president. I said, "This is a statement from the plow contractor who works this neighborhood. He observed Miss Foster taking staged photos on multiple properties on dates that do not match the snow events." The board president read the statement. He looked at Patricia. He said, "Miss Foster, can you explain this?" Patricia said, "I must have grabbed the wrong photos from my phone. It was an honest mistake." I said, "You submitted 3 photos, all with the same timestamp, all from the same location. That is not a mistake. That is fabrication." I pulled up the next slide. I said, "Third, Miss Foster attempted to tow my vehicle twice, using a parking map that had not been officially published. The online version does not match the printed version she used." I displayed both maps side by side. I said, "She claimed the update was approved by the board but not posted. That violates the HOA's own noticing requirements." The board president looked at Patricia. He said, "Did the board approve a parking map update?" Patricia said, "We discussed it at the last meeting." The board secretary, a woman with short gray hair, said, "We discussed it. We did not vote on it. It is not approved." I said, "Fourth, Miss Foster authorized a contractor to enter my property without a court order. When I objected, she told the contractor to proceed anyway. A police officer intervened and confirmed that the HOA does not have the authority to perform work on private property without permission or a court order." I displayed a photo of the work order Patricia had signed. The board president said, "Miss Foster, Did you authorize contractors to enter private property without the owner's consent? Patricia said, the bylaws allow emergency remediation. The board president said, only with board approval. Did you get board approval? Patricia said nothing. The board president looked at me. He said, do you have anything else? I said, yes. One more thing. I pulled out my phone and opened a voice memo app. I said, on the morning of the first tow attempt, Miss Foster made a statement that I recorded. I played the clip. Patricia's voice came through the speaker. The board will back me because they are afraid of me. The room erupted. One of the board members said, is that your voice, Patricia? Patricia said, that was taken out of context. I said, the context is clear. She admitted she was using fear to control the board. She also admitted this is personal. I played a second clip. This one was from the police interaction. Patricia's voice said, the board will hear about this. I said, she has been using her position to target me with fake evidence, unauthorized enforcement, and intimidation. The board president stood up. He said, this hearing is adjourned. We will discuss this in executive session and issue a written decision within 7 days. Miss Foster, please remain after the meeting. We need to speak with you privately. Patricia grabbed her binder and walked out of the room. The other residents stared. I packed up my stuff and left. 3 days later, I got an email from Diane. The subject line said, hearing decision. The email said the board had found no violation. The complaint was dismissed. All fines and fees were reversed. The email also said the board had referred Patricia's conduct to the management company's regional supervisor for review. I called Diane and asked what that meant. She said, it means Patricia is under investigation. If the regional supervisor finds she falsified evidence or abused her authority, the board will vote on whether to remove her from her position. I said, good. 2 weeks later, I got another email. The subject line said, policy update. The email said the HOA had adopted a new winter policy with clear definitions, neutral proof standards, and a real appeal process. The new policy required photographic evidence to include metadata and GPS verification. It required board approval before any emergency remediation. It prohibited individual board members from authorizing enforcement actions without a vote. The email also said Patricia Foster had resigned from the board. I showed the email to my father. He said, "You did it." I said, "She did it to herself." A month later, I was at the grocery store when I saw Rick, the plow contractor. He said, "Hey, I heard what happened at that hearing. Word got around. A lot of people in the neighborhood are talking about it. Patricia tried to pull the same thing on 2 other properties. They are all filing complaints now." I said, "Good. Maybe the board will actually pay attention." Rick said, "They already are. They hired a new management company. Diane is gone. The new rep is supposed to be a lot more professional." He paused. He said also, "There is a board election coming up. A couple of people are running on a platform of fixing the enforcement process. You should run." I said, "I do not have time for that." He said, "You might not have a choice. People know your name now. They know you stood up to Patricia. That matters." I thought about it. I did not want to be on the HOA board. I did not want to spend my evenings in meetings arguing about parking rules and landscaping violations. But I also did not want another Patricia. I did not want someone else to go through what I went through. So I put my name on the ballot. The election was in April. I ran on a simple platform: transparency, accountability, and no more enforcement by ambush. I won. I got more votes than anyone else. The new board met for the first time in May. We voted to adopt a formal evidence review process. We voted to require all enforcement actions to go through the management company instead of individual board members. We voted to publish all rules online with a public comment period before adoption. We voted to create a resident advisory committee to review complaints before they went to a hearing. And we voted to ban Patricia Foster from serving on any HOA committee for 5 years. If you like stories about standing up to HOA bullies and bad rules, hit that like button and subscribe for more. The first winter under the new rules was quiet. No surprise inspections, no fake photos, no tow trucks in driveways. The snow piled up, the plows came through, and people shoveled their walks without fear. The neighborhood felt different. It felt like a neighborhood again, instead of a surveillance state. I still see Patricia sometimes. She lives 3 blocks over. She does not look at me when we pass. She does not wave. She just keeps walking. I heard she tried to run for the board again the next year, but she did not get enough signatures to get on the ballot. I heard she filed a complaint with the management company about someone's holiday lights, and the new rep told her to put it in writing with photographic evidence and metadata. I heard she did not bother. My father moved back to his own place in the spring. He said he was proud of me. He said I handled it the right way. He said I should have charged Patricia for emotional distress. I told him it was not worth it. The real win was changing the system. The real win was making sure it did not happen to someone else. The new board is not perfect. We still argue. We still have enforcement issues. But we have rules now. Real rules. Fair rules. Rules that apply to everyone, including the people who enforce them. That is all I wanted. That is all anyone should expect. I appreciate you spending your time with me, and I will be back soon.